All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Good afternoon. Welcome to School Choice Foundation to the Future. Today, we are honored certainly to have with us as a special guest, Betsy DeVos, who is, of course, she was President Trump's Secretary of Education, the 11th in our nation's history, and I look forward to having a robust conversation about some of the issues that are really important to us all. Let me first start off by thanking you all for attending. Frankly, we have 60 plus confirmed, and we thank you all for participating in this process. So important that we are able to engage with our stakeholders around the country, and this is an important opportunity for us to hear from our nation's foremost expert on the issue of school choice. So that's fantastic. As a young kid growing up in South Carolina, I really had two major passions. One was football. The other one was my family. And my mother always thought that football was a good opportunity to keep me busy and to teach me structure and discipline and teamwork. She thought that goal of playing for the Dallas Cowboys. I know that some of you all are huge fans of the Cowboys, and those who are not, we'll just pray for you. Anyways, that was that was my goal in life. But my mother always thought that you should have a backup plan, and the backup plan always included a quality education. As many of you have heard my story, I didn't always believe my mother's plan was the best plan, but I've learned since then, after nearly failing out of school, that it's really important to follow mom's wisdom. And as one of the reasons why I'm such a vocal supporter of school choices, I've done it wrong and then I got it right. And it's one of the reasons why I say that education is one that is the closest thing to magic in America. And while we certainly have a lot of reasons to be hopeful and optimistic about the future of this nation, one of the most important aspects of hope is restoring quality education to every single zip code in America. Kids around the country have unlimited potential, and we want to see them realize their dreams. And the fastest way to do that is for each child to have quality education. It doesn't matter whether that child lives in an inner city or in rural America. The key for our future as a nation, the key for our future as the American family includes quality education as being an issue that is paramount to the human flourishing that we've become so accustomed to. We've seen so many polls that reinforce the reality of this, especially when you think about the COVID-19 and the amazing impact that the pandemic has had on so many families. That's one of the reasons why we've seen the recent polling information tell us that 71% of folks support school choice, and that includes majorities of African American and Hispanic families supporting school choice. So we find ourselves on solid ground. And that poll was done on April the 6th, really important information. I want to first introduce my colleague, Congressman John Molinar. He represents the 4th Congressional District in the state where Betsy has been and continues to be a champion of school choice. Listen, this is John. Listen, reading through your amazing career, I mean, I did not realize you were a chemist, that you were a business development director, and frankly, you were also a school administrator. So it's really, you're very well-rounded on this topic, and what a blessing that someone of your caliber would invest so much of your life in making young people's dreams come true. So thank you for that passion and the dedication you have to the next generation of leaders. You continue to serve as the House co-chair of the Education, Opportunity, and Innovation Caucus, and you have always been a champion of school choice. So I thank you for that. Next, I'd like to introduce our guest of honor and my good friend. As I said before, Betsy DeVos served as President Trump's Secretary of Education, the 11th Secretary of Education, and has been deeply involved in the education reform issue for decades, 3 decades. Her reputation as an education advocate and philanthropist are attributed to her passion for and to see all kids receive quality education regardless of their zip code. And I will say that before Betsy was our Secretary of Education, I had the chance, of course, to know her from a different perspective. But the one thing I will say, I have spoken at many schools around the country. Perhaps one of the more exciting opportunities I had was speaking at the school in Michigan where Betsy and her family invested resources and created really an amazing experience around aviation. And I will say, going into that school and meeting the kids, wow, the potential in our kids when the harness fits, we can direct their energy in the right direction, in the right way, powerful. And I experienced that when I was at the school that Betsy and her family has supported for years. So at this point, I welcome any remarks that you may have, Betsy, to get us started, and then we'll move from there.
Well, thank you so much, Senator, for inviting me today, and Congressman Molinar, and thank you both for your leadership of the School Choice Caucus. We know collectively that the momentum around this issue is continuing to build, and I'm so thankful that you have both agreed to carry the banner forward and really continue to help educate your fellow members about what school choice actually is, what it can look like, and what it can, importantly, what it can mean to the kids that it ultimately serves, and that you're committed to continuing to build the support in our nation's capital to support families across the country in pursuing their needs and their dreams for their children. So thanks for the opportunity to join you, and I'm looking forward to the questions and discussion.
Well, thank you very much. And my co-chair, Congressman.
Yeah, well, thank you, Senator Scott. I appreciate your leadership for this caucus, and also just your tremendous being a champion for school choice. And I loved hearing your football story. We wish you would have played with the Lions. We could have used
Well, you already have Barry Sanders, and I had no hope of getting on the field whatsoever with Barry Sanders. God bless that kind of talent. I was more like the guy who carried the water bottle for Barry Sanders.
Yeah, I think we all were. I mean, he's incredible. Well, we appreciate everyone participating today, those who are watching today and are going to participate in this discussion. Secretary DeVos, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your commitment to our country and your service to our country. And we're very proud of you from Michigan. We're just very thankful for all you've done in this role, but also all you've done to promote school choice and education reform in Michigan and around the country. And we've known each other for a long time, and I know you're dedicated to helping our students and our families with the best educational opportunities they can possibly have. And you've really been a champion on this, and your advocacy has made a difference for millions of families across the country. And I know you're going to continue to stay engaged and involved in this mission for years to come. We do have some questions for you today. And what I'd like to do is maybe start with, we've got a few that have come in already, and then there will probably be some on the call as well. But as Senator Scott had mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic, it heightened disparities that exist in education, but also study after study has shown, and he mentioned the 71%, more and more people are thinking about school choice and supporting school choice. And I think as we've seen students who have fallen behind during this time, particularly students of color, these challenges have made it even more important for families to have choices and opportunities that meet their children's needs. And so I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing support for school choice increase. And I'd be just curious, you've probably been monitoring this very closely over the past year, but what are your thoughts on school choice and what you're seeing around the country and also in different states? I understand that 10 states have already passed legislation to create or expand school choice. And I'm wondering if you're believing that that's more a response to the pandemic, or is that simply a broader effort that is underway that people realize the importance of school choice?
Well, Congressman, thanks for that background and that question. I really think the answer is both. There's no question that the pandemic has helped to accelerate people's awareness of the need for options for their own children and for their neighbors. And it's also helped open up some political space around this. Remember, this whole past year, every parent has been focused on education in a way that they probably had never done before. And I think it's safe to say that nearly every parent has been or is unhappy about something that has transpired over the last year. And so the continued build in support for this issue nationally, and we've already referenced the fact that essentially 3 out of 4 people in our country support this notion that families should have the freedom and have the empowerment to choose their child's education environment, whether it's a school building or it's a homeschool or it's a hybrid or it's a virtual school, whatever the descriptor beforehand. More and more parents and more individuals countrywide are supporting this notion of more choice and more control for families. And there, as you've referenced, there has been really good progress since the pandemic. 10 states have passed just this year alone, thus far, have passed legislation to either expand programs that they have in their state or create new programs. And that is really encouraging. But there was also really solid progress pre-pandemic, new programs that were formed in both Tennessee and very surprisingly for some in the state of Illinois, where a very sizable tax credit scholarship program was passed, and now the folks there are continuing to fight to continue to have that program and hopefully to expand on it. And the politicians involved with this have really been examples, I think, that we can all look at and take comfort in the support for this, that this can be a very good policy move, but importantly for those concerned about it, it's also a good political move. Just ask Doug Ducey, Jeb Bush more than 20 years ago, former governor in Indiana, Mitch Daniels, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. All of them have very personal stories about how this issue has been particularly meaningful for them and how it's been a winner for them as well.
That's great. The next question has to do with some of the international situation for school choice. Some people think that vouchers, charter schools, public school choice is really unique to the United States, but might be interested to find that many countries allow families to use government funding to choose the educational option that best meets their children's needs. And my understanding is over 25 countries have some version of school choice. And I'm wondering if there are lessons that we can learn from other countries. Obviously, we have a unique situation here in America, but always can learn from best practices. And I'm just wondering if there are any things that you see in other countries and kind of balance that opportunity for choice with accountability.
Well, thanks for that question. And let me just, before I dive in there, were you not able to see, or were the participants not able to see me in that last round?
I was not able to, but I don't know if others could.
Is it working now?
It is now, yes.
Okay, good. So your question, and I admit to being just a little bit distracted, but around accountability and accountability mechanisms for choice. And I would just say that the very best mechanism for accountability starts with the parents and the families, because when they're choosing a school or an education setting for their kids, they're doing so proactively. And Senator Scott referenced the Aviation Academy, a charter high school that my husband Dick started about 10 years ago. And that school, for me, every time I walk into it, is a great example of every single student that's there and their family made a conscious choice and decision to want to be there. And so accountability begins with actually making a decision that you want to be in a place. And I think that's really, bottom line, the argument for the best accountability is being accountable to the families that choose your environment. But in terms of a mechanism, I really, really especially like the education savings accounts, which are gaining a lot more traction today in a number of states. And for those who aren't really familiar with what an education savings account is, it's simply a pool of funds, a mechanism for families to be able to customize a child's education. And so if instead of taking the full amount of the funds, which you can do if you choose to go to one school and receive everything that that school has to offer, you can take that education savings account and employ a portion of the funds to one set of classes, perhaps through one outlet, and a portion of them to perhaps tutoring for a specific subject area. It provides the greatest amount of flexibility. And importantly, it really empowers the families using them to shop well for the education services that they want to have for their children.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. And it seems that, that allows people to prepare and plan for the future as well. And, one of the things that you hear sometimes is criticism back and forth between public and private schools. And sometimes you have the criticism between public school, traditional schools, disparaging charters, and you get people who are involved in private school choice sort of disparaging or diminishing public schools. How do you were education secretary for all of the above, and how do you find that we can improve the dialogue and focus on the needs of children and their education rather than some of the divisive efforts that go on?
Well, I think it starts with focusing on students, not on systems. And from the moment that I went into the Department of Education, I urged our whole team to be thinking every moment of every day about what we were doing to help improve things for students individually and focusing on their needs and on the issues that impact them, not on buildings and not on systems. And, from a personal perspective, it doesn't matter to me what kind of school a student goes to, if that's the choice that they're making with their family. What matters is that that place is meeting their needs and that place is focused on them. And I've often used the metaphor of a backpack. Kids go to school every day. Most of them carry some kind of a backpack to school, put in, their whatever they need for that day in it. But if we talk about that backpack also carrying the resources that are already spent on them, and allowing their families to direct those resources through that backpack to the school that they choose, I think that is a helpful way of thinking about it. Instead of sending funds to buildings and systems, sending funds with individual kids.
Is that the biggest obstacle, the fact that this is kind of how we've always done it? Is that one of the biggest obstacles? And what do you find to be the challenges in terms of having people open to the idea of, kind of the thinking outside the box when it comes to this kind of focusing on the student, their needs, and the flexibility of school choice to do that?
Well, yes. I mean, it is always easiest to default to what we know and what we've done instead of to make changes. I mean, change is difficult no matter the setting and no matter the reason. But I also find that the arguments against making these moves in various states, sometimes they center around where a particular elected official is from. So rural rural elected officials often think that school choice is not particularly relevant for them or the kids in their district, because they can't envision that another school building should or would be built next to the small rural school that they might have in their district. And I really urge and encourage them to think much more broadly about what choice can mean. It doesn't mean that a new building needs to be built next to, you know, the traditional building in their district that's maybe the center of their community. But what it could mean is that some kids in that school might be able to access courses that school can't possibly offer because of the size and scale of the school. And so I think of it as additive and really, broadening a student's opportunity to experience their education. And also, if there were a bunch of kids in the school who perhaps learn differently than the rest of their classmates, there's no reason they couldn't have a little micro school that co-locates right within that building and meets those students' needs. So thinking about choice much more broadly and what that can look like and creative solutions to the needs of students really helps people sort of get outside of their box and the traditional method of and mode of thinking to think much more broadly.
You know, just to illustrate that point, and you know my background as a charter school administrator, and I can still remember when I went and met with one of the superintendents of the district that we were adjacent to, and you know, he was upset with me at first about being part of a competitive enterprise. And what he ended up saying was that it's been good for their school district because parents had an option, and it forced them to think about what are they offering their parents and their students. And he said it's totally changed the discussions they have in their staff meetings around the water cooler. And I thought that was probably the best compliment you could get, where, and I give him a lot of credit, where he was thinking about the needs of the kids. And as you're thinking about how you serve those families, what kinds of innovation do you want to come from? So I think that's a great point. Let me just, on a personal note, you were education secretary. What would you say were some of your biggest accomplishments, things that your successes, things that you're most proud of during your time as our Secretary of Education?
Well, there are a number of things. And first of all, I was very proud of the team with whom I got the privilege of working. And again, everything we did was with a focus on doing what's right for students. And that began with a real effort to restore as much local control and focus back to the states and local communities as possible under federal law, and doing everything we could to shrink the size and scale of the department. That was an overarching goal and focus, while keeping our focus centered on what was right for students. Reforming federal student aid. As you well know, this is a very complicated, large organization within the federal government, and the processes within the Federal Student Aid Office were very antiquated. And you know, just the process of bringing them their infrastructure and process into the 21st century really was a huge lift, and one that is not yet complete, but is well down the track. Adding more information to empower students to make decisions, good decisions, hopefully, about their higher education futures was another element of that. Importantly, advancing the conversation on school choice and elevating that nationally. I don't think we would be in the middle of the momentum we are around school choice today were it not for the last 4 years of really discussing this all across the country and within the halls of Congress and elsewhere in Washington, to really elevate people's knowledge and understanding of the issue, and just in many cases simply awareness. The Title IX regulation is another area that I'm very proud of our work on, and restoring balance and fairness to a very difficult subject area, and one that impacts way too many young people. I'm very proud of the work that we and the whole team did on that. And then I'm obviously very concerned about what's happening today. And you see, their first competitive grant out of the department is essentially a bribe to teach the 1619 project. That's that and all of the implications around that area is of real concern. The appointment of Richard Cordray at FSA coming from the CFPB, another huge red flag. And then I'm concerned also about the requirements that are being put into place for states and local districts to access the ARP funds. I think that's an area where I would encourage a lot of focus on the part of yourself and your colleagues.
Okay, well, thank you. And I just, as someone who watched you in this role, you did elevate school choice very much in Congress as well as in the White House. And, different speeches that were given, highlighted the importance of school choice more so than I can ever remember. And, as someone who serves on the Labor, Health, and Education Subcommittee, I want to say one of your biggest successes is the way you handled yourself with grace, with integrity, and strength of purpose in those hearings, because that was not a friendly crowd, people trying to dissuade you from the mission, and you always handled it so well. So on a personal note, I want to thank you for all you did in that arena. Something you touched on, though, that has a lot of America concerned, and public trust in government is down in some ways, and the mood of the country is tense. More than ever, we want to have a sense of unity in the country and a sense of community. And one area that has always united our country, the left and the right, was the importance of civics education and having students have a knowledge and skills in this area. And I'm sure you saw some bright spots in this arena, but I also, I know there are some storm clouds on the horizon in this area, and I wonder if you can kind of expand on it. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but I wonder if you can share some of the things that you think are going well, but some of the concerns that you have as we go forward in this area of civics education.
Sure. Well, I do frankly wish there were some more bright spots in this area, and I'm glad that we're focusing a lot more intentionally on the need for history and true history and solid civics education. The results from the civics portion of the NAEP test in the last go around were very dismaying, when we know that a small fraction of graduating seniors have what anybody would consider a reasonable command of American history. There's a lot to be concerned about. And I wish that we saw immediate bright spots here. But there are a couple of schools and networks that I'm aware of that are doing a really good job in this area. One of them is a handful of private schools in North and South Carolina called Thales Academies. And they have a very keen focus on American history and civics and communication, and being able to actually articulate these things. And then Hillsdale College also has an increasing number of charter schools that the college has overseen and is essentially a sponsor of. I visited one of their schools in Texas and was very impressed with the students there and their obvious love for and command of this subject area. But this is an area that I hope that more people are going to take seriously at the local and state level. It's an area fraught for the federal government to weigh into more. I know that might be a temptation, but it also is a big danger, because while we might see something really positive on one side, we know very quickly that can be co-opted and changed, and we've seen it in a number of other areas. So I would caution an overreaction and trying to take action that would mandate a top-down Washington approach, and encourage everyone part of this call to continue talking about the subject and the need for solid history and civics education, and really urge and encourage state and local leadership to grab hold of this in a new and meaningful way.
Well, that's really helpful, because I do think you're right. There is a lot of concern, and I think in Washington, all of us want to, I shouldn't say all of us, many of us want to see history taught without being revised. And, we have a great heritage in this country, and one of the blessings we have is that our country can continue to work towards a more perfect union. And that was part of the design and our founding documents and the vision for the country. And in some ways that's under attack right now. But to your point, the federal government has a role in education, but you're right, it's states and local, school boards and people involved at the closest level of their children's education need to be engaged in this. And
Yeah.
how do we get that message out? How do we engage people? And, sometimes when they talk about things like the 1619 Project or the critical race theory, some of these things that are very, people aren't real familiar with it, and it becomes divisive. And how do we bring this to the attention of everyday Americans who just want to see their kids learn about the history of this country in the way that it should be taught?
Well, you referenced it, Congressman, about the call in the Constitution to aspire toward a more perfect union. And so, history and civics need to be taught with the warts and all, but not a revision of history that simply isn't true. And so to distinguish from efforts like the 1619 Project, which has been refuted by many, many experts as a revision and simply untruth, I frankly think a lot of folks are waking up across the country to what has been going on and what is going on. And I'm encouraged to see parents stepping up in ways that they hadn't before. That needs to continue happening. And importantly, that energy and momentum needs to be harnessed in such a way to ultimately give families more, the power and control over their kids' education and their education decisions, which feeds right into and speaks right into the necessity for school choice, across the country for every family, ultimately, to be able to have that ability to make those choices and control, that will ultimately come back around and result in a much more interesting menu of school experiences, but also, I think, importantly, a very healthy dialogue and debate over what actually does go on in school buildings in your community and in your state.
Well, and that gets to the point of accountability that you made earlier. That's where the ultimate accountability is.
That's right. That's right.
Well,
And I often reference Florida as an example. They have been underway with advancing school choice now for over 20 years, after Governor Bush first led that initiative in Florida. And, lots of studies being done on the implications in Florida for the students there. But when you have in Florida now approximately half of the kids making choices other than their assigned school building, and the resulting the outgrowth of that has been improvements in achievement levels for students in schools that stay in their assigned school when other kids have chosen to go elsewhere. You referenced it too about when when you are administering in a charter school, when you have something to sort of benchmark yourself against and or compare to, you make different decisions, and you are more ready to make changes and make adjustments based on the competition down the street. Competition's a good thing, and we have it in every other area of life. We need a heck of a lot more of it in K-12 education.
Well, you're right. It spurs innovation, and that's something we can all benefit from. We have some questions from our listening audience, and what I'd like to do is go to some of those. The first is from Julie Collier. How can we get more public school districts engaged in supporting and participating in school choice? Many parents make their local public schools their first choice. However, public school districts seem so reluctant to engage.
Well, Julie, thanks for that question. And I'd just like to be really clear. The biggest resistors to empowering families and empowering students with these choices are the ones who have the biggest financial stake in making sure it doesn't happen. So it starts with the teachers union bosses, and it extends to the whole alphabet soup list of groups that all ultimately benefit from a system that stays the same, a system where all of the resources go to one system and one choice, essentially. And so if you're able to empower families and direct those resources to allow the families to make those decisions, that is going to ultimately improve options and offerings for all families in that particular community or your particular state. But the biggest resistance to change starts with the teachers union and all of those who are trying to amass more power. We've seen them act in absolutely abominable ways in the last year. And the fact that today in all too many places, kids don't have the option of being back in school in person goes right to the feet of the teachers' unions. And that I want to distinguish that from the great teachers that there are all across the country. There are teachers who have been absolutely longing to be back in the classroom with their kids. And it's the unions and their systems, all of their allies, that have continued to dissuade and in fact bar kids from being back in school, and have continued to fight against giving families choices.
You know, there really were during this last year some notorious examples of union bosses who really were not looking out for the best interests of the kids in their own area. They may have looked out for their own children's best interests, you know, getting them to school in a private school or some other option that they had available for them. At the same time, they were giving a very different message. And, you know, we saw that in California, we saw that in other places, but like you said, there were also many heroic teachers who, you know, day in and day out, just do the important work of educating our kids. And I think it is important that you separate sort of the selfishness from the selfless people who really care about the kids and their future.
Well, that's absolutely right. And I like to talk too about how what kind of implications education freedom and school choice would have for teachers as well. Teachers need more freedom to be able to teach and instruct kids in ways that they aren't able to themselves. And I think specifically about a couple of roundtables that I had while secretary with teachers who had been teachers of the year in their state or their district, and who soon after their year victory lap as teacher of the year left the classroom. And now these are great teachers who loved kids, loved being in the classroom. But when I asked them to talk about what happened, what's their story, almost to a person, it was a total dissatisfaction after coming back after that year and essentially being told, you've had your day, now get back into your box, into the classroom. And we don't need to hear anything new or different from you, or don't be creative. One young man I remember hearing him say, I got tired of being told to keep it down, you're having too much fun. And that's just the wrong result, period.
Well, that's, I always, and as an administrator, we talk about classroom management, and obviously you get into school discipline at times. And I remember one person saying, the best classroom management is an engaging teacher, someone who's engaging the kids and they're enjoying learning. And I think that is so true.
That's right. Well, I'm sure you were a great administrator.
well, thank you. I enjoyed it. I'll tell you, it's one of the most rewarding things when you can, help young people, and then you see them as they're older and become adults and living lives. And it's really a blessing to be part of that adventure. And let me see if we've got any more questions in the queue here. I would like to ask one, as we kind of go forward, what are you thinking about as you go forward, and what role would you like to have advocating for school choice, being involved in, raising the level of education across the country, but how would you continue to be involved?
Well, I am going to continue to advocate on behalf of kids and their futures and empowering their families to make those choices. And I'll be doing that in a variety of ways, as I did before. But I'm very excited about the momentum I see in states that just a couple of years ago wouldn't have even considered a school choice proposal. I mean, I think about West Virginia, which 2 years ago didn't even allow for a charter school. Now they have a very robust charter school law and essentially a universal education savings account. And that's because families there realized what their kids were missing, what the opportunities might be if they had some more control and power, and a very intentional state senator who was very, very instrumental in helping to coalesce the energy behind the last year to give this opportunity to families across West Virginia. Kentucky, the same way. They had a governor there who vetoed a tax credit bill, meanwhile sending his own children to a private school, the height of hypocrisy. And fortunately, his veto was overridden, and now Kentucky will be implementing a major school choice provision. So there's a lot of momentum, and I want to be a part of continuing to help fuel that momentum.
Mm-hmm. Well, you certainly, you've had a very responsible position, a very demanding job, and you seem to still have the same energy, and I'm just impressed that you're able to, go from that role to this role now, and you're still just such a strong advocate. And I appreciate that as a Michigander, someone who cares deeply about education. But I know across the country, this is opening up, as we've gone through this COVID situation, as we have learned to think outside the box a little bit more, think about what really matters most in life. And I think it is going to offer really some fresh opportunities for innovative ways of thinking, and school choice to be at the forefront. So I can't think of a better time to have you, with your experience as secretary and understanding the whole of education in America, but also to be able to focus now on kind of getting things to this next level.
Well, thanks, Congressman. it's an exciting time, and at the same time, it's a very concerning time because the kids who are the most hurt over this last year are the ones who can least afford to be the most vulnerable. And so that's why the provisions at the state level in particular, and importantly, I hope that Congress will get to a point where where there will be support for the Education Freedom Scholarship Initiative to help add rocket fuel to what states are doing. But my heart is breaking for those kids who have literally withered on the vine in the last year. And I just hope and pray that we will turn the light switch on for them and give them and their families the opportunity to not only catch up, but to move way forward in becoming everything that each of them is meant to be.
Well, thank you for those sentiments. This is our first meeting of the caucus in this way, and you've given us a lot to think about, a lot to reflect on, but also a lot to look forward to in the future. And I would just ask for you to stay engaged with us. There are a lot of people, as you know, on the call, and people who care deeply about these things that we're talking about today, and just very grateful for your participation and your leadership over these past years, as well as what you're working on now.
Well, thanks. And thanks for your and Senator Scott's leadership within the Congress. And I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Great. All right. Well, you take care. Hopefully